The sky above Silthern was always pale and silver, as if the sun was too afraid to shine. Towers of white stone stretched high, glowing with soft magic. Elves walked the streets below, dressed in fine robes, proud and quiet. Their words were smooth, their steps light. They did not look at the humans who swept the floors or scrubbed the walls. Humans were not people here. They were tools, things. Kayla moved with a tired rhythm, her hands raw from washing iron pots in the high kitchens of the Moonspire. The gold collar around her neck glinted in the torchlight. It was not real gold. It burned if she tried to remove it. Her back ached, her fingers bled. But her eyes were sharp, always watching, always thinking. The elves called her K7, a number like all the others. Names were not allowed for humans. Names were too dangerous. Names meant hope. Tonight, a new human was brought in. He was thrown into the slave pens behind the kitchens. Kayla was passing by with a sack of flour when she heard the noise. Grunts, metal clanging, the sound of someone spitting. She peeked through the bars. He was tall, with dark hair, muscles scarred from old fights. He had the same gold collar. But unlike the others, he stood straight. He looked at the elven guards like they were ants. Not fear, not hate, just calm. One of the guards laughed and hit him with a staff. The man staggered, but did not fall. He smiled instead. Kayla blinked. That was not normal. No one smiled here. Later that night, she brought bread to the pen. She placed it near the bars, careful not to be seen. The man moved closer, kneeling in the shadows. "What's your name?" she whispered. "Rourke," he answered. Her eyes widened. Saying the name was punishable by lashes. "Are you trying to get whipped?" He shrugged. "Only if it's worth it." Kayla almost smiled. Almost. "Why are you here?" she asked. He looked around, then leaned closer. "To break the chains." She frowned. "We've tried. They always find us. They always kill us." "Not this time," he said. "This time we take their tower." Kayla stared at him. It was madness. It was foolish. It was impossible. But still, something about his voice made her listen. Something in his eyes. They were not the eyes of a broken man. They were the eyes of someone who had already seen victory and walked backward through time to reach it. For the first time in years, Kayla felt her heart beat faster. Not with fear, but with something else. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Rain fell over the stone paths of the Moonspire, soft and steady, like the sky was weeping. Kayla moved through the servant halls with quiet feet, a basket of herbs in her arms. Her collar felt heavy today. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the weight of what Rourke had said the night before. "We take their tower." No one talked like that. Not here. Not ever. Yet she could not forget his voice. Calm, certain, like he had already seen the end. At the edge of the kitchens, near the waste tunnels, Kayla saw him again. Rourke. His hands were dirty with ash. He was fixing a broken water pipe. A punishment job. But she noticed something strange. He was not fixing it. He was drawing something with the soot. A symbol, one she did not know. She knelt beside him, pretending to help. No one paid much attention to humans talking so long as they worked. "What is that?" she asked under her breath. "A door," he said, "to a place the elves forgot." She frowned. "What place?" He wiped the mark away with his sleeve. "Deep under this tower is a vault. Old magic. They sealed it long ago. They fear what's inside." Kayla stared at him. "Why tell me?" Rourke looked at her. "Because you still have fire in your eyes. You haven't given up." She did not answer. Not yet. Days passed. Kayla watched him work, watched him speak in whispers to others. A healer, a cook, an old man who once shaped iron before the elves banned human smiths. She saw something grow between them. Not a plan. Something deeper. Trust. On the fifth night, they met in the tunnel behind the ash pit. No guards came here. The smell was too strong. Rourke held a small map, drawn from memory. "This is the path," he said. "We crawl under the storerooms, then down the old well. That leads to the vault." "What's in the vault?" asked the cook, a thin woman with burns on her arms. "Power," said Rourke. "Something the elves fear more than swords. Something we can use." "And if we get caught?" Kayla asked. Rourke looked at her. "We won't." His words were sharp, full of truth. Not because he knew they would win, but because he refused to believe in failure. They'd moved at night, quiet steps, breath held. Kayla's heart pounded like a drum. The old well was covered in roots. Rourke pulled them away, one by one. The air below smelled of stone and dust. They climbed down, torches hidden, only small flames to guide them. At the bottom, they found a door of black metal. Strange marks ran across it like rivers of silver. Kayla reached out. Her fingers brushed the metal. It was warm, alive. Behind it waited something the elves had tried to forget, and the humans were ready to remember. The door was cold beneath Kayla's fingers, a deep, unsettling cold. She pulled her hand back for a moment, unsure. Rourke had already begun to study the markings. His eyes narrowed, his brow furrowed as he traced the strange symbols with his fingers. "It's old," he muttered. "Older than the tower itself." Kayla stood behind him, her breath quiet in the still air. The vault had been forgotten by the elves. It had been hidden, buried under layers of stone and roots. Now it was a secret they would not be able to keep much longer. "Can we open it?" Kayla whispered. Rourke nodded, a glimmer of something fierce in his eyes. "We will." He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the door, pressing gently. The metal seemed to pulse, as if it were alive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the door began to shift, creaking as it opened slowly. The air on the other side was thick with dust. An ancient smell of forgotten time filled Kayla's nose. Her heart raced. Behind the door, the passage led into a large chamber, dark and silent. The only light came from the flickering torches they held. "Stay close," Rourke said, his voice low. Kayla nodded, stepping carefully into the chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, though most of the items had long since crumbled to dust. But in the far corner, something gleamed. It was a pedestal, tall and thin, with something glowing atop it. The glow was faint at first, but as they approached, it grew brighter like a heartbeat. Rourke's steps slowed. "There it is," he whispered. "The ether heart." The object was not much larger than a fist, but it pulsed with energy, as if it held a power the world had forgotten. The light was soft but strong, radiating from the core of the stone. The elves had hidden it away for a reason. It was no ordinary artifact. Kayla could feel its power in the air, vibrating through her bones. She reached out instinctively, her fingers trembling. Rourke caught her wrist before she could touch it. "Not yet," he warned. "We need to understand how it works. We need to unlock its power." "But how?" Kayla asked, her voice quiet. Rourke stared at the ether heart, his face hardening. "We've learned that it responds to more than just touch. It responds to us, humans." He turned to Kayla. "You're the key. This thing doesn't choose the elves. It chooses people who can fight, who can survive, like us." Kayla felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had always believed that humans were weak, that they had no place in the world of elves. But now, standing here in this forgotten vault, she wasn't so sure anymore. The aether heart glowed brighter. A sudden heat spread through the chamber. The air hummed with the beginning of something new. "Do it," Rourke urged. "Touch it. Show the elves we are not their slaves." Kayla stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. Then, with a deep breath, she reached out and placed her hand on the ether heart. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, everything changed. The aether heart hummed beneath Kayla's fingers. Its light grew brighter, pulsing with a strange rhythm, as if it were alive. At first, Kayla felt a wave of warmth. Then a sharp jolt of energy coursed through her. She gasped, pulling her hand away. But the power didn't fade. It stayed with her, swirling in her chest and her veins. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Rourke, watching from a distance, stepped forward cautiously. "It's the heart of this world," he said softly. "It's the power the elves feared, and it's ours now." Kayla's mind raced. This wasn't just magic. It was something deeper, something raw. She could feel it. The connection to something ancient, something that had been buried for so long. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a key to something greater. But how could they use it? How could they control it? "We need to test it," Rourke said, his voice hard with determination. "The elves will come looking for us soon. When they do, we need to be ready." Kayla nodded slowly. The thought of facing the elves, the very beings who had crushed humanity beneath their feet for centuries, made her stomach twist. But now she had something they didn't. Now they would have to reckon with humanity's strength. "We'll start with something small," Rourke said, picking up a stone from the ground. He held it in his hand, focusing his gaze on it. "Focus on the stone," he instructed. "Use the power to change it." Kayla stared at the stone in his hand. At first, nothing happened. But as she reached out with her thoughts, she could feel the aether heart responding, the power growing stronger within her. She focused, and the stone began to shift ever so slightly. Rourke grinned. Good. Now try to move it. Kayla concentrated harder. The stone trembled, then rolled slightly across the ground. She couldn't believe it. She had made it move. The power of the Aether Heart was hers to control. Good, Work said again. Now we know it works. We can start preparing. They spent the next hours in the vault testing the power, learning to control it, and practicing in silence. The feeling of the power flowing through Kayla was unlike anything she had ever known. With each movement, each focus, she felt stronger, more alive. The elves had thought they were invincible, but now they were the ones who would learn what it meant to be outmatched. When they finally emerged from the vault, the night was still and cold. The moon hung high above, casting long shadows over the city. Kayla could see the faint outline of the moon spire in the distance. It was so close. The elves' stronghold, their world. But it was also the place where they would fall. Work turned to her, his expression serious. We have the power now, he said, but we need more. We need others who will fight with us. Kayla nodded. It was time to take the first step. The time for hiding was over. They would no longer cower beneath the elves' rule. They would bring the fight to them. The wind howled through the cracked walls of the old fortress, carrying with it the bitter scent of burning wood and ash. The night was quiet, but Kayla could feel the tension in the air. The elves were not fools. They knew something was wrong. Rourke's plan had worked, at least for now. The rebellion had been a whisper, but it was spreading fast. Humans in the lower city were starting to stand taller, speak bolder. The whispers of the Aether Heart had reached their ears. They wanted to fight. But with every victory, the elves grew more desperate. And now they were coming. They'll strike at dawn, Rourke said, his voice low as he sat by the small fire in their camp. They'll try to crush us before we can organize. Kayla nodded, her fingers clenched around the hilt of a blade she had stolen from a fallen elf soldier. The metal felt strange in her hand. Not heavy, but foreign. She had never wielded a weapon before, but now it was as much a part of her as the air she breathed. How will we fight them? She asked, her voice tight with worry. We're just humans. They have magic, weapons, everything. Rourke looked up at her, its face hard and set. We have something they don't, he said. We have determination. We have anger. We have the power to fight back. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest. She had seen the elves at their worst, cruel, uncaring, and unyielding. They had broken her people for centuries, making them bow and serve without question. But now the tables were turning. Now they would pay for their arrogance. We can't just fight them with force, Rourke continued, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. We need to outsmart them, hit them where they least expected. Like the raids? Kayla asked. Like the ones we've been doing. Exactly, Rourke replied. But bigger, more direct. We'll target their supply lines, their communications. If we can cripple their ability to respond, we can take them down, piece by piece. Kayla looked at the others in their camp. A handful of rebels, all humans like her. Once slaves, now soldiers. They had no magic, no grand weapons, no armies. But they had something that the elves have forgotten about, the will to survive. Rourke stood, his eyes meeting Kayla's. This is it, he said, his voice filled with resolve. We fight or we die. Kayla's fingers tightened around the blade. She had never been this afraid in her life, but she had never felt more alive, either. There was no turning back now. If they were to die, they would die fighting. They would die on their feet, not on their knees. As dawn began to break, casting pale light over the ruins of the city, the rebels moved out. The wind carried the sound of their steps, soft but steady, like the first steps of a great storm. They would bring the fight to the elves, and they would not stop until their chains were broken forever. The moon was low in the sky, its pale light barely cutting through the dense fog that rolled over the hills. It was the perfect night for a raid. Rourke had gathered his group of rebels by the old well where they had hidden for the last few days. Their numbers were small but growing. Word had spread like wildfire among the humans in the city, and more joined them each night, ready to fight for their freedom. Kayla stood with the others, her hands clenched tightly around her dagger. The night felt still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Every step they took, every move they made, had to be precise. One mistake, and the elves would strike back with everything they had. Tonight we hit the supply depot, Rourke said in a quiet but firm voice. It's the heart of the elves' control over this area. If we take it, they'll lose their edge. They'll be forced to retreat or risk leaving us alive. Kayla nodded. They had planned this for days. The elves depended on their supplies, food, weapons, medicine, and without them, their forces would weaken. But Rourke knew better than to think it would be easy. The elves would not let them have it without a fight. Remember, Rourke continued, we hit fast. We hit hard. We don't stay long. Kayla glanced at the other rebels. There were only a dozen of them, but each one carried the weight of years of suffering, years of silent anger. They had nothing left to lose. They moved through the fog, staying low to the ground. Their steps were quick but silent, like shadows blending with the night. The supply depot lay on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and guarded by elves. It was heavily fortified, but they knew a back entrance. Rourke had been scouting it for days. As they approached the depot, Keela's heart began to race. She could hear the faint sounds of elves talking, their voices sharp in the cold air. They were close. She could feel the power of the Aetherheart deep inside her, burning with anticipation. The power was still strange to her, still new, but tonight it felt like a part of her. She was ready. Stay in pairs, Rourke whispered. We split the guards, then break inside. Do not engage unless necessary. Kayla moved with the group, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. They reached the back gate, and Rourke signaled to the others to wait. The gate was locked, but not for long. Rourke knelt down, quickly working on the lock with a small tool. The others watched, their eyes scanning for any movement. With a soft click, the gate swung open. The rebels moved inside, their footsteps quick but silent. The depot was dark, the only light coming from a few scattered torches. Crates of supplies were stacked high around them, and the smell of salt and dried meat filled the air. They were in. Split up, Rourke whispered. Take what you can carry. We're here for their food and their weapons. Kayla moved swiftly, grabbing what she could, her heart pounding in her chest. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was too quiet, too still. The elves would be coming. She could feel it in the air. As she turned to head back toward the others, she heard it, a distant sound like the crack of a whip. Then a shout. The elves had found them. The storm had come. The shout echoed through the dark supply depot, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots pounding the ground. The elves had discovered them. It was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived. Rourke's voice cut through the rising chaos, sharp and commanding. Move, get out now. Kayla's heart raced as she grabbed another crate, throwing it over her shoulder. The rebels scattered, grabbing what they could carry, darting toward the back gate where they had entered. But the elves were already closing in. They could hear the clatter of weapons being drawn, and the sound of the guards shouting orders. Kayla's pulse thudded in her ears as she sprinted toward the gate, dodging crates and barrels in her path. Rourke was ahead of her, signaling to the others to hurry. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not here. Not now. They reached the gate, but before they could slip through, a voice rang out from behind. Halt! An elven captain stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his soldiers. His eyes glinted coldly in the torchlight as he drew his sword. You dare steal from us, the captain sneered. You will regret this. Rourke's eyes flashed with determination. He pulled his sword from its sheath, the steel glinting in the dim light. Not if we stop you first. The captain smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. You cannot fight us. We are the rulers of this land. You are nothing but vermin. Kayla felt a surge of anger. She had been nothing but a slave, nothing but a tool to be used and cast aside. But tonight, she was something else, something the elves had forgotten, a human who had had enough. Without thinking, she darted forward, using the shadows to her advantage. Her dagger was in her hand, and the Aetherheart's power flowed through her, urging her on. She slashed at the captain's soldiers, catching one across the arm. The elf stumbled back, surprised by the strength of her strike. The captain's eyes widened for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. You think you can defeat us? He spat. You aren't nothing. But Kayla saw something in his eyes. Fear. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by a human. The elves had ruled for so long, they had forgotten how to face an enemy who wouldn't bow down. We're not nothing, Kayla muttered to herself, her voice steady despite the chaos. We're everything. She lunged at the captain, her dagger aimed at his side. He parried with a swift move, his sword ringing against hers. But Kayla wasn't done. She twisted her body, using her smaller size to slip past his guard, and in one quick motion she struck again. The captain staggered back, surprised by the force of the blow. Rourke took advantage of the opening. With a powerful swing, he knocked one of the soldiers to the ground. The other hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to fight or retreat. Go, Rourke shouted to the rebels. Get out of here. We'll hold them off. Kayla hesitated for only a second, but the sight of Rourke standing firm, his eyes locked on the captain, made her decision clear. She turned and ran toward the gate. The rebels surged out, one by one, as the sound of clashing swords echoed behind them. The night had come alive with the battle for freedom, and there was no turning back now. The night had turned into chaos. The rebels had barely escaped the supply depot, but the elves were relentless. Their soldiers were closing in, and the city was becoming a maze of shadows and danger. Kayla's legs burned from the run, but she pushed forward, her breath ragged in her chest. Rourke was beside her, his face set with grim determination. The rest of the rebels were scattered behind them, running for cover in the narrow alleys of the city. The sound of footsteps echoed around them, growing louder as the elves pursued. They couldn't keep running forever. We need to make a stand, Rourke said through clenched teeth. We fight here. Kayla glanced at him, fear rising in her throat. They had already stolen the elves' supplies. They had taken a huge risk by even making it this far. Now they were outnumbered, surrounded, and desperate. But there was no turning back. Where? Kayla asked. They'll overwhelm us. Rourke scanned the area, his sharp eyes catching sight of a nearby courtyard. It was small, surrounded by tall walls, and there was only one way in or out. It was a trap, but it was the only option they had. There, Rourke said, pointing toward the courtyard. We hold them there. It's the best chance we've got. Without waiting for any more argument, he led the way, the rest of the rebels close behind. They reached the courtyard and quickly took up positions along the walls, preparing for the inevitable. The Etherheart still hummed within Kayla, a steady reminder of the power they had stolen from the elves. The elves were closing in fast. Their footsteps became louder, more hurried, and then they appeared at the entrance to the courtyard. A dozen soldiers, their armor glinting in the moonlight, their faces cold and cruel. The captain from the supply raid was there too, his eyes burning with hatred. You think you can defeat us? The captain called, his voice carrying across the courtyard. You're nothing but an army of rats hiding in the dark. We are the elves. We are eternal. Rourke stepped forward, his sword drawn, the steel gleaming in the pale light. You may be eternal, but we're not afraid anymore, he said, his voice firm and strong. We fight for our freedom. The elves hesitated for a moment, the words clearly rattling them. They weren't used to defiance, but the captain recovered quickly, raising his sword. Kill them all, he shouted. The elves surged forward, charging into the courtyard. Kayla's heart raced as she tightened her grip on her dagger. She could hear the clash of steel, the shouts of the elves, and the grunts of the rebels as they fought back. Kayla fought like she had never fought before. Her blade flashed through the air, each strike a testament to everything she had lost and everything she was fighting for. The Etherheart's power surged through her with every movement, every breath. The battle raged on. For every elf they struck down, two more seemed to appear. But the rebels didn't falter. They fought with everything they had, every ounce of strength, every moment of pain they had endured. Rourke was fighting beside her, his movements precise and deadly. He cut down one soldier, then another, his sword never slowing. Kayla kept her eyes on him, knowing they couldn't afford to lose him now. He was their leader, their symbol of hope. The courtyard was filled with the sounds of battle, but Kayla knew deep down they were reaching the end. This fight would decide everything. If they lost here, it would be over. But if they won, Kayla's grip tightened on her dagger. They would not lose. Not tonight.